Scuba divers are coming forward with downright terrifying stories, and some of the accounts I will be sharing with you all today are so bizarre and unexplainable, you will understand why they are terrified of the ocean. An anonymous scuba diver recounted a harrowing encounter with the unexplained underneath the waves. The witness claims that he was out with two diving buddies in the Puget Sound along the northwestern coast of the United States of Washington, hunting for prawns at about 1 a.m. when something happened that they could not quite explain. The witness said this: "The creepiest dive of my life though, two buddies of mine and I were on a night dive in the Puget Sound hunting prawns. It was about 1 a.m. and we're a good 100 feet deep, the pitchiest black you could imagine. We used to do this thing on night dives where we'd get in a circle, turn off our lights, then stir up the water and watch the bioluminescence float around us like floating stars in a black watery space. Beautiful. Only this one time we turn off our lights, stir up the water, and the water glows just enough to reveal a fourth person sitting in our circle. We were at a dive resort, so it wasn't so odd to see another diver, only it was 1 a.m. We'd seen no one else prepping a dive at the dock. He was also alone, which was odd considering the dangerous conditions of a night dive in those waters, and he had no fins or gloves. I don't know how he swam so well without fins, or didn't get hypothermia without boots or gloves. We wore dry suits because it was so cold, but this dude was in a wetsuit with exposed skin, and we thought we saw a giant gash in one of the legs. So the three of us all notice him, and we're too scared to move. I can hear my buddies panting in their regs, regulator breathing equipment, and the guy just smiles and waves, then swims away." Pretty creepy to be sure. In another report, first published in the Santa Rosa Communicator back in 2011, a ghost was spotted in a so-called blue hole or an underwater sinkhole. Two scuba diving instructors were apparently carrying out a dive at this same blue hole when they noticed something strange through the grate, which supposedly keeps anyone from going down into the more dangerous territory of the hole's deeper, gloomy, unexplored depths. There, past the grating, they claim to have seen a solitary diver wandering about wearing a pink tank in the murk. Now, at first, they thought it was just another diver who had somehow managed to infiltrate past the security measures. Still, as they drew closer, this mysterious diver allegedly vanished into thin air right before their very eyes. When they asked the people running the hole if there was another diver down there, they were told that they had been the only divers there all day. Now, apparently, it turned out that this had not been the first report of a mysteriously vanishing diver in the hole, and authorities would actually tell them that there had been at least 5 other similar reports from there. Ghosts are certainly not the only strange things one can encounter while diving through our world's water. In fact, plenty of stories of mysterious unknown creatures appear in the dim depths to scuba divers. In fact, an anonymous ex-military diver told of something they encountered on a dive where they lost several allies. Back in the early 90s, I did some diving with the military for the better part of a decade. I've seen some pretty weird stuff. However, nothing comes remotely close to this particular mission I was on around 89 or 90. I'm not really supposed to talk about it, but I'm not in the service anymore, and I believe that it's people's right to know these kinds of things are out there. We were sent on a reconnaissance mission of an undisclosed location. The objective was to investigate some strange sonar readings our intelligence had picked up. I was part of a 4-man team, all experienced divers. We quickly descended below and noted how unusually cold and dark the water was. It was almost as if there was some foreseen blanket clouding any heat and light from the center above. The further we descended, the stranger things got. Here's where my story turns into a literal X-Files episode, so bear with me. We started seeing these beings, figures. They were humanoid in shape, but they were not human. They had very elongated bodies and large eyes that reflected our light. Their skin was almost translucent. It was nothing any of us had ever seen. Within a moment or two of noticing our presence, they acted aggressively. One of them lunged through the water, if you could even call it that, at another diver and knocked the regulator out of his mouth. I won't go into the details because it wasn't pretty, but he did not make it back to the surface. It was evident we were not welcome. Another close friend of mine tried to ascend, but 2 of these things gained on him and pulled him down below. Another dear friend of mine that I lost. They started to swarm, at least in groups as much as 2 or 3. The closer they got, the more distorted and fuzzy they became. I know that doesn't make a lot of sense and it's hard to describe it accurately. This was really one of the only times I ever felt like I was truly going to die. I was fortunate enough to actually make it back to the surface and had somehow suffered radiation burns on the right half of my body where one of these things got close. We lost 3 divers during that mission, and we were told by our superiors that we need to keep quiet about it. We were then debriefed and sent on our way. I'll reiterate that I can't disclose the location, but I will say that this wasn't my first tango dancing. I've had many other friends who dealt with underwater missions in and around this area, and I've had very similar sightings of other strange things and X-Files type experiences. I find it hilarious that so many people are so quick to dismiss these kinds of things when actuality, military personnel have more run-ins with these kinds of things far more than civilians will ever realize. Over 80% of it civilians will probably never hear, and the only time that things like this become public is when some of us decide to come forward with our own stories. It happens a lot more frequently than you ever know, and to answer some of your questions, yes, there have been bodies retrieved, crafts retrieved, pictures taken, videos taken, evidence that the public will never see. Even us who have had face-to-face experiences are told to never talk about it, and that's the end of it. I was a staunch atheist in 1983 before I joined the Navy. That experience alone made me a believer in higher power. 1969, Fortean researcher Richard Weiner was on a deep dive doing an oceanographic work for General Electric off the coast of the Bahamas, along with a diver named Pat Boatwright. Now, at some point during their dive, they were startled when what seemed to have been a very massive jellyfish-like creature came up through the gloom beneath them. Weiner would say of the bizarre encounter here, Pat Boatwright grabbed me by the shoulder and pointed downward. It was late in the afternoon, and the rough seas were distorting the light that penetrated into the depths. What I saw was phenomenal. How deep it was, or its size, I couldn't tell. It might have been 100 feet beneath us, maybe 150 feet. Its size, I could only guess at maybe 100 feet across, possibly 75, but no less than 50 feet in diameter. It was perfectly round. Its color was a deep purple. It was moving slowly up toward us. At its outer perimeter, there was a form of pulsation, but there was no movement of water. As we started for the surface, it stopped its ascent. Then slowly, it began to descend into the blackening depths. Awe-stricken, we watched until it was no more. Now, he could not take any photos because he had allegedly used up all of his camera film, so there is sadly no way to really know what is happening. Was this truly a giant jellyfish, or possibly a giant squid, or what? Well, it's hard to say. In the 1970s, a very similar but hard to classify report was given to cryptozoologist Chad Arment from a person who claimed his friend had encountered a mysterious predator in the depths of the Gulf of Mexico. The witness had been a deep-sea welder and reportedly often saw giant headless glowing living fire hoses that were fed upon a very bizarre and monstrous creature. That report reads this: "My friend George Hale was unable to describe the predator in detail. It was too big and too close to him. It was as big to him as you are to an ant. As a matter of fact, he had to ascend PDQ because he was in fear of being crushed like a bug, but the predator had a pallor and skin texture like a sea anemone, and it might have been built along the lines of a starfish or a freshwater pond hydra, and it was eating the fire hose entity by swallowing it. Its method of propulsion is a mystery." Now, it's hard to say what this could have been, and it is a pretty darn strange account, whatever it was. In more recent years, we have a report from 1992 off southeastern Japan in the Pacific Ocean. During a deep dive surveying expedition in a diving bell by British diver Mike Cleary at a depth of roughly 1,700 feet, or 518 meters for those counting, he was allegedly confronted by an immense, unknown creature. The bizarre creature was 25 feet long with a single elongated dorsal fin, no neck, and a head like a seahorse's with cow-like eyes and barracuda-like teeth. Guys, I thought I told you I don't want to talk about my ex like that. Oh, wait, we're rolling? Oh, strangest of all, it was said to possess 2 webbed limbs protruding from its torso. The outlandish monstrosity circled the diving bell before fading into the darkness from whence it came. It has been suggested that this might have been an unknown giant species of lobe-finned fish, kind of like a coelacanth, but there's no way to know for sure. In 1998, Samed Jafarov came forward with a story of a shark-like creature that terrorized him and his companions. The man was out spearfishing with a friend near a place called Fort Shevchenko when they spotted a massive sturgeon that they set their sights on. Now, at that moment, a vast torpedo-shaped fish rushed from the depths they initially took to be a shark. The man reportedly shot a spear into the thing's head, but it was unfazed and proceeded to latch onto his legs with a fierce set of jaws. With this weird giant fish latched onto his legs, the man made his way towards the surface where the crew aboard the boat managed to pull him aboard. He was then rushed to the hospital, received a blood transfusion, and had his leg amputated right below the knee. When asked what his mysterious aggressor might be, he thought it was a shark. The true culprit remains unknown. In 1988, a professional scuba diver named Robert Foster was diving near the coast of Florida when he noticed some strange disturbance in the water in his periphery vision. When he turned to see what it was, he saw a figure dashing through water, rendered murky and foggy through the stirring up of sediments. Whatever appeared to be somewhat undulating towards him, and when it got to within 20 yards, the diver noticed that the thing had arm-like appendages that seemed tipped in sharp talons and were apparently reaching out towards him. Now, as it drew closer still, Foster claimed that he could see that its top half had smooth skin, unmistakable breasts, and a head of flowing hair, while the bottom half was covered in scales like a fish. Whatever it was did not seem friendly, and the frightened diver would say of its gaze, "I have never seen such evil hate in the eyes of any human or animal before." He could luckily make it to the surface and aboard his vessel without further incident. Another very strange account comes to us from 1953 when Australian diver Christopher Loeb was in the South Pacific testing a new deep-sea diving suit when out of the murky darkness came floating up a creature like something out of an H.P. Lovecraft story. He would say of it this: "All the way down, I was followed by a 15-foot shark which circled around full of curiosity, but made no attempt to attack. I kept wondering how far down he would go. He was still hanging around some 30 feet from me, and about 20 feet higher, when I reached a ledge below which was a great black chasm of enormous depth. It being dangerous to venture farther, I stood looking into the chasm while the shark waited for my next move. Suddenly, the water became distinctly colder. While the temperature continued to drop with surprising rapidity, I saw a black mass rising from the darkness of the chasm. It floated upwards very slowly. As at last light reached it, I could see that it was of dull brown color and tremendous size, a flat, ragged-edged thing about 1 acre in extent. It pulsated sluggishly, and I knew that it was alive despite its lack of visible limbs or eyes. Still pulsating, this frightful vision floated past my level, by which time the coldness had become most intense. The shark now hung completely motionless, paralyzed either by cold or fear. While I watched fascinated, the enormous brown thing reached the shark, contacted him with its upper surface. The shark gave a convulsive shiver and was drawn unresisting into the substance of the monster. I stood perfectly still, not daring to move, while the brown thing sank back into the chasm as slowly as it had emerged. Darkness swallowed it, and the water started to regain some warmth. God knows what this thing was, but I had no doubt that it had been born of the primeval slime countless fathoms below. So what was going on here, and what was this thing? Who knows? From the Bahamas, and in particular the island of Andros, we have countless stories of giant octopus-like monsters known as the Luska running amok in these very waters, where they are said to favor the secluded caves of blue holes during the day and to come out at night to feed. Numerous fishermen have seen the monsters, and it is often claimed that the whole boats have been yanked down below the surface near the blue holes. The Lurks is often blamed on divers who have vanished or died in the blue spots, with some accounts even speaking of bodies or survivors of attacks demonstrating abnormally large sucker marks upon their flesh. Some more dramatic tales even say that even the shoreline is not necessarily safe, with people on the beach sometimes snatched and dragged to the caves if they venture too close to the water. While it may all sound like mere spooky local lore, witnesses typically swear by what they have seen, and sightings and encounters have continued even into recent years. I've got a story to share that I've kept to myself for a long time. It's about something I saw while I was a military diver in the South Pacific back in the 1970s. It's going to sound crazy, but I swear on my life it's true. I was part of a special unit tasked with recovering sensitive equipment from downed aircraft and submarines. We were based on a small remote island, and our dives often took us into some of the most treacherous and unexplored parts of the ocean. One day, we got a call about a submarine that had gone down nearby. The details were hazy, but we knew it was carrying something classified, and it was our job to retrieve it. We geared up and headed out, not knowing what we were getting ourselves into. The dive was deep, deeper than we'd ever gone before. The water was dark and cold, and the pressure was intense. Then, out of the darkness, it appeared. A massive, ghostly figure, easily the size of a school bus. It was a shark, but unlike any shark I'd ever seen. Its skin was a ghostly white, and it had long, flowing tendrils trailing from its sides. It was both terrifying and beautiful, a creature from another world. The shark seemed to study us, its eyes reflecting the light. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it turned and took a nosedive down into the open sea and vanished. We're startled by this, but we completed our mission and returned to the surface. I couldn't shake the image of that shark from my mind. We all talked about what we saw and wondered what kind of shark it was. I was told it was probably just a giant squid, or maybe I was suffering from nitrogen narcosis. For reference, I've dived with sharks before, and this was no ordinary shark. I've great whites countless times, and yes, even basking sharks. This was almost double the size and was more menacing looking. It reminded me of a coelacanth, or even a sturgeon in the sense it looked like an ancient prehistoric fish. It was really something else. It's like we got to see something straight out of the dinosaur era. I don't have too many exciting stories to share about diving in the ocean. I've never had anything too terrifying like some divers have shared, but this one always stuck with me. In 2005, an underwater diver in one of the blue holes claimed that he was attacked by an enormous octopus that he estimated to be around 50 feet in diameter. Holy cow. Which reportedly stole his camera before retreating into a murky cave. Now that, my friends, is a photographer who doesn't just have great grip, but great focus too, and he's probably going to go on to make some pretty big waves in underwater photography. Okay, let's get serious here. Yet another diver claimed to have seen a nurse shark get grabbed by a tentacle as thick as a telephone pole and sucked down into a cave. There was also a recent report of a fishing boat whose crew noticed something yanking their buoys entirely underwater, a feat that would take a phenomenal amount of strength. One of the buoys was still attached to the boat, actually, and this force, as mysterious as it was, dragged the entire vessel to the water for some time. Now, sonar on the boat allegedly showed a large pyramid-shaped creature, and traps attached to retrieve buoys were damaged as if they had been mauled and twisted by some vast, angry animal. More well-known than these are the various expeditions launched by a few famous TV programs. Perhaps the most dramatic of these was a trip made by the show Destination Truth. Now, during this expedition, the crew allegedly picked up anomalous sonar readings of something enormous moving and crawling about, which they had at first taken to be part of a cave wall. One of the divers they had put into the water also saw the strange thing, saying that something gigantic moved through the water in a flurried cloud of bubbles and slid into the tunnel. The crew on the boat were so concerned that something so large and potentially deadly was in there with him that they pulled him out and even turned off the lights on their boat to avoid attracting whatever this was. Footage of what might be the Lusca was also taken at the time, perhaps showing a tentacle. Still, it is blurry, indistinct, and far from conclusive. The TV show River Monsters also visited the blue holes. While they did not catch anything bizarre, the host Jeremy Wade speculated that the Lusca was probably some species of giant octopus. Wade would say this: "My investigation now centers on whether a giant octopus could potentially catch and consume a person. I've seen this animal's amazing predatory behavior, so I know in principle this is a possibility. Indeed, the most common theory for what the Lusca could be is that it is an enormous unidentified species of octopus, and there has even been some evidence pointing to this. Parts of the carcass of what is thought to have been an extremely large specimen of an octopus allegedly washed up on the Grand Bahama Island in the Bahamas on January 18, 2011, and appeared to be only the head and mouth of the creature. When the potential size was extrapolated using normal octopuses as a comparison, it was estimated that this beast would have been between 20 and 30 feet across." Oddly, in July of that same year, another octopus carcass measuring 12 feet across was found floating on the surface in the same vicinity. Unfortunately, this specimen was merely measured but not retrieved. In addition to ghosts, goblins, and ghouls, we have diver encounters with something that seems to be completely of another world. One very intriguing and pretty spectacular account occurred in 1959 in a Soviet-controlled Poland. In February of that year, several witnesses in a place called Gdynia observed a glowing light fall from the sky to plunge into the frigid waters of the harbor, which was choked up with the ice floes at the time. It created quite a commotion at the time, and thinking that perhaps an aircraft had actually gone down, a search and rescue effort was launched with a team of divers. It was there, down through the icy waters and the muck at the bottom, that the divers would allegedly uncover a piece of shiny metal that had not rusted and was assumed to be part of whatever it was that had come out of the heavens. According to the odd account, this metal piece was turned over to the Polish Navy, who thoroughly examined it before sending it off to the Polytech University, where it apparently vanished into the mist of time with no further word. In the meantime, the Navy closed the whole area and restricted access, but the weirdness was only beginning, because a few days after the object had come down into the harbor, it was reported that several military personnel came across what was described as strange silhouette humanoids that appeared to be wearing a uniform of some sort and were apparently injured, with burns on their face and crawling along the beach in exhaustion, wet and seeming to have crept out of the water. The soldiers attempted to communicate with these strange humanoids, which appeared to be male. Still, they were not familiar with the language they spoke. They were obviously seriously injured, and it was arranged to bring these beings to the hospital, where it would get even stranger. Once at the hospital, it was immediately apparent that these particular humanoids were weirder than anyone had ever thought. The uniform they wore was made of a strange metallic material that no one even recognized, and no matter what medical staff did, they seemed unable to remove it. The uniform had no discernible buttons, zippers, or any way to put it on or take it off, and the material it was constructed of apparently could not be cut or torn in any way. In overall appearance, the thing appeared to be more or less almost identical to a human being. However, there were anomalies, such as extra digits on its fingers and toes, and other minor differences that marked it as not precisely human. Doctors tended as well as they could to the burns on the beings' faces, and still, when they removed an armband on the uniform, one in particular died of what appeared to be cardiac arrest. The body was sent in for an autopsy, and they purportedly needed specialized equipment to remove that odd uniform from the body. When the body was examined, the humanoid was found to have a completely different circulatory system than any other human being out there, as well as other organs we did not recognize. Unbelievably, another creature was also found on the same beach in the meantime. This one apparently fell into a coma-like state and was placed in some sort of frozen stasis. The body whisked away and hidden somewhere, probably in a secret underground military facility. Now, what happened to these two bodies and that piece of what is assumed to be their crashed ship, nobody knows. The case has been picked up by ufologists all over the place and over the years, and in fact, UFO researcher Arthur Shuttlewood and others have written it off at length. Still, there seems to be very little to verify the story, no witnesses have ever been interviewed, and it has the feel of being almost an urban legend rather than anything else. However, one does wonder just what happened here, if anything, because there was nothing ever conclusive. So, this happened a few years back. I was part of a group of seasoned divers. We were a team of 6. All experienced divers, with a few of us having military backgrounds. We had the best equipment money could buy, and we were prepared for anything, or so we thought. It was our 3rd dive of the expedition. We were around 200 feet below the surface, exploring a particularly interesting section of the ocean floor. The water was clear, and the visibility was excellent, thanks to our powerful underwater torches. Suddenly, one of our divers noticed something unusual. He pointed his torch towards a dark cavern area. We all turned to look, and what we saw was something none of us could explain. There was a large metallic object nestled in the ocean floor. It was roughly cylindrical, with strange markings that none of us recognized. It was unlike any submarine or underwater vehicle we had ever seen. It was just sitting there, silent and still. We approached it cautiously, our initial excitement giving way to a sense of unease. As we got closer, we noticed that the object was not just sitting on the ocean floor, but seemed to be partially buried in it. It was massive, easily the size of a commercial airliner. We tried to communicate with our surface team, but our radios were acting up. We could hear static, and our voices were garbled. It was as if the object was interfering with our equipment. We decided to get a closer look. We swam around it, examining it from all angles. The markings on the object were like nothing we had ever seen. They were not any known language or code, at least not one that we recognized. Suddenly, the object started to hum. It was a low, pulsating sound that we could feel in our chests. The water around us seemed to vibrate. The object started to glow, emitting a soft blue light. We were awestruck and honestly terrified. We decided to get the hell out of there. We started swimming back towards our ascent point, but the object seemed to follow us. It moved slowly, gliding through the water with ease. It followed us for a few minutes, then stopped and returned to its original position. We ascended as quickly as we could without risking decompression sickness. When we reached the surface, we were shaken. We tried to explain what we saw to our surface team, but it was hard to put into words. We had dove down to the same area in search of it again the next days, but it was gone. Still one of the strangest things I've ever experienced while diving. I'm not saying what it was because I don't know. When I tell people they think it's an alien craft, but I don't buy that. Personally, I think it was military vehicle of some kind, but I could be wrong. In the summer of 2002, a group of young men, including 17-year-old eyewitness Michael, embarked on an adventure on the picturesque Okanagan Lake, a sprawling river-like body of water in the heart of Canada. The lake, which is a popular destination for boating enthusiasts, stretches for a couple hundred miles and is about 5 miles wide. The group's agenda for the day was simple: to enjoy the tranquility of the lake, do some fishing, and perhaps indulge in water sports. Now, the day was picture perfect. With the sun blazing from a cloudless sky, the lake was alive with activity, numerous boats dotting the shimmering water. Michael and his friends, equipped with inner tubes, had anchored their craft considerably from the shore, and they were ready to soak in the lake's beauty and the day's thrill. Now, one of Michael's friends was already lounging on an inner tube tethered to the boat roughly about 30 feet away. The others were engaged in lighthearted banter while the friend's father was engrossed in fishing. Michael decided to join his friend on the inner tube and floated out to him, and the two were amidst a great conversation when something caught Michael's eye. A flicker of movement to his left made him turn, but he saw nothing unusual. Then, in a scene reminiscent of a horror movie, what he described as a giant eye emerged from the depths of the water, affixed on him. Large enough to be the size of a human torso, the eye was attached to a colossal thing lurking beneath the surface. Terrified by what he was seeing, Michael lost his balance, falls into the water, swimming back to the boat, screaming in panic. Now, his friends who had already spotted this were also back on the boat, helping Michael up. The others, now intrigued by his friends' reactions, claimed to have seen something massive swimming beneath them as well. The friend's father tried to reassure everybody their fears, suggesting it was probably just a large sturgeon that was surfacing. However, their fears were confirmed when a massive serpent-like body emerged from the water only a mere 20 feet away from their boat. With its scaly dark brown and green skin, the creature bore an uncanny resemblance to a sea serpent. The group only saw part of the body come out of the surface of the water and back down, but they estimated it to be at least 10 feet in width. The encounter left the entire group shaken, but convinced that they had witnessed a lake monster. They realized the deceptive calm of the water could hide something so monstrous. After all, Lake Okanagan does have the mysterious Ogopogo creature, I believe is what it's called, and it's very possible that that is what they saw. Fast forward to about 2017, and a strange incident unfolded on the shores of the mighty Columbia River. Now, this gargantuan river, a natural boundary separating the states of Oregon and Washington, originates from the depths of the Pacific Ocean, snaking its way into the heart of the PNW. The Pacific Northwest, for those that aren't familiar with the area. Now, it's a bustling waterway frequently traversed by colossal vessels, and it meanders all the way to the coast, eventually disappearing into the vast expanse of the ocean. Now, on this day, our eyewitness Kevin was perched on the sandy beach on the Oregon side of the river, just basking in the spring panorama view in the company of a few friends and companions. Now, abruptly, one of his friends gestured towards the water as he inquired, "What's that?" Now, following the trajectory of his friend's finger, Kevin's gaze landed on an enormous snake-like creature gliding effortlessly through the water. It bore a striking resemblance to a mythical sea serpent often portrayed in the antiquated drawings of the 1500s, its body undulating rhythmically above and below the water's surface. This thing was situated at a distance too great for Kevin to discern the specifics of its facial features or hue. All he could ascertain was its dark complexion and its size, which was very impressive. It was not concealed in any way or manner. Anyone standing around could easily see it and would have a clear, unobstructed view. Kevin and his friends were completely captivated by what they were seeing, thinking, what is this thing? Is this a seal? Is this some sort of sea serpent? What are we looking at? Kevin tried his best to rationalize that it was not entirely impossible. I mean, after all, the ocean feeds directly into the river all the way from Astoria, Oregon, providing a potential pathway for this thing to snake its way all the way up into the river. In another report, a man by the name of John had spent much of his life working on a fishing boat in the frigid waters up in Alaska. Now, this already wasn't a job for the faint-hearted. It required a serious commitment of time, 4 to 6 months a year, battling the elements, hunger, fatigue, and the relentless grind of long hours. Yet it was not without its rewards in terms of experience and monetary. John discovered a profound sense of camaraderie among his fellow seafarers as they would navigate the treacherous waters of the open sea. But one winter, as they were engaged in their routine fishing off the Alaskan coast, something bizarre and extraordinary would take place. Their boat, as John described, was violently struck from beneath by a powerful force that would send the crew sprawling. At first, they thought they had collided with a whale, but a second equally forceful hit on the side of the boat quickly dispelled that notion. Now, as the crew kind of regained their footing and rushed to identify the source of the impact, they were greeted by a sight that defied belief. Roughly about 20 to 25 yards from the boat, a colossal thing emerged from the depths. John's description of the beast was reminiscent of a creature from a prehistoric era, a bizarre amalgamation of an alligator and a dinosaur. Its head was gargantuan, dwarfing that of any whale, and it held the boat in its gaze before disappearing back into the icy waters. The crew was left in a state of terror. Many were convinced they had just witnessed a living dinosaur. John found it hard to disagree. I mean, if dinosaurs had survived into the present day somehow, this creature would undoubtedly fit the bill. It boasted a striking color pattern of green and dark blue on its head, and its jaws were lined with large, sharp yellow teeth. Although he did claim that it bore a resemblance to a crocodile, its appearance was more akin to a ferocious dinosaur. He expressed relief that none of the crew had fallen overboard and the boat had not capsized. Had that happened, well, they would have been easy pickings for this thing. John went on to explain that the force of the impact wasn't meant to capsize the boat, or at least he doesn't think so, that this thing accidentally just bumped into the boat and was curious, or so he claims. Now, about 7 years ago, which is roughly 2016, 2017-ish, a man by the name of Cole had ventured to the verdant expanses of Michigan for a summer to visit his mother, who had just relocated there following his father's death. Now, it was a balm for his mother's grief-stricken heart, yet a strange summer incident would take place, changing things. The incident in question unfolded in the early days of September at Lake Dewey. They bore witness to a spectacle that was as bizarre as it was unsettling. A colossal entity covered in a dense coat of red hair emerged from the placid lake and kind of ambled into the surrounding woodland. The creature was of such considerable size that it could be likened to a walking log, its entire form obscured by its hairy exterior. The only comparison John could muster was to the character Cousin It from the Addams Family, a similarly prominent hairy figure. The creature's sight unnerved Cole and his mother, prompting them to quickly vacate the area, never returning. Now, subsequent tales of the Lake Dewey monster began to circulate, with differing descriptions ranging from werewolf-like attributes to a more simian appearance. John and his mother had not seen its face or even a clear side view, but the mere sight of a 10-foot-tall creature that just effortlessly rises from the lake and waltzes off into the woods was more than enough to convince them that they did not want to cross paths with it ever again. Bear with me as we kind of jump around here in the time frame. In the spring of 1995, a seasoned outdoorsman by the name of Spencer found himself amid a strange encounter within the Ozark wilderness. Now, this account is very similar to the last, and you'll hear why. Now, a man of nature, Spencer's regular hunting and hiking excursions were not merely about the thrill of the hunt, but a profound appreciation for all things and beauty of the outdoors. The search was simply a secondary pleasure. Now, on this expedition, the chill that was winter had finally receded, leaving behind a damp landscape. Now, during this journey on the third day, Spencer stumbled upon an anomaly that would forever change his perception of the natural world. Nestled amidst the towering mountains and dense forest was this perfect little tranquil lake, approximately, by Spencer's standards, the size of a football field. Opting to take a break and refuel, Spencer settles down by the water's edge, pulls out a granola bar, and he's snacking away. And as he's enjoying it and just enjoying the silence and the nature, the silence is broken by an unusual sound emanating from the opposite side of the lake. A series of bubbles and splashes that disturbed the otherwise calm waters. Now, emerging almost immediately from the depths was a creature that defied logic and reason. What he described was a reptilian entity, green scales glistening in the sunlight, clambering out onto the shore and vanishing into the woods. But what astounded Spencer was the creature's ability to stand and walk on two legs just as a human would. It then nonchalantly just vanished into the surrounding forest. Now, despite the surreal nature of the event, Spencer eventually mustered the courage to go and investigate the other side of the lake in the same spot where this thing had emerged. Of course, he was beside himself, his heart pounding out of his chest, and he discovered the unmistakable evidence of the creature's existence. He found large bipedal footprints, or should I say claw prints, marked and etched into the muddy shore. But this being 1995, the guy did not have a camera or even a Kodak disposable camera on him, so it's all anecdotal. Now, the creature, as he estimates, was imposing, estimated to be around 7 to 8 feet tall. Its coloration was a gradient of green and darker on its back and head, gradually glistening towards its front. It bore an uncanny resemblance to the Argonians of the popular video game Skyrim, leading Spencer to question whether he had encountered a mythical lizard person or an unknown aquatic cryptid. Upon sharing his encounter with his friends, he was of course met with other stories of Bigfoot sightings, but none of them really matched the specifics of his own experience. Another young man named Doug had a terrifying experience to share that even he could not explain. The harrowing experience that befell Doug is simply unexplainable. It was an encounter that would terrify him so much he does not wish it upon his worst enemy. The only detail that he was willing to share was that it was located somewhere in the south, a large and relatively well-known lake visited during the off-season. Gee, that's specific. Doug was a mere 16 years old when this happened. Accompanied by his sweetheart and a few of her companions, they arrived at the lake at around 3 in the afternoon. The area, as they described, was pretty well deserted, and they hastily jumped into their swimsuits and plunged in the cold water. And from there, they swam a reasonable distance around and then from the shore, approximately 100 feet. As an adept diver, Doug was intrigued to uncover what lay beneath the surface of the lake. And so he ventured a little bit further, actually about 20 or so feet, and he was greeted by and so Doug thought he would venture out a little further and try to dive down on his own and just to see if he could find anything. So he swam out a little bit more, closer to the center of the lake, and he dove an estimated 20 feet under the surface, to which he was greeted by the expected murkiness. And he would dive again and again, propelling himself further down each time, intending to explore as much as he could before the need for oxygen forced him back to the surface. Now, just as the last rays of light from the surface began to fade, he was met with a terrifying sight. What he described was a monstrous face just 5 feet away, staring back at him. His instincts kicked in and he propelled himself backward, not forward, desperately trying to escape the horrifying thing. He managed to look down and saw this thing pursuing him, its humanoid arms reaching out to ensnare him. This thing, he said, resembled the infamous creature of the Black Lagoon, complete with scaly amphibian-like arms and hands. So Doug would break the surface of the water with this thing hot on his heels, gasping for air and paddling furiously towards the shore, screaming for help, and his friends completely oblivious to the horror unfolding beneath the water. His girlfriend and friends would just look at him in confusion and panic. They knew he wasn't drowning, he was clearly swimming to them, so they were like, what's going on? Now, just as he was nearing the shore, this thing somehow managed to latch onto his ankle, attempting to drag him back towards the center. Doug reacted by turning instinctively, kicking the thing's hand off his ankle, and breaking the surface again. His screams for help would echo across the lake, his girlfriend now rushing in to his aid and helping him reach the safety of the shore. Once on dry land, Doug's girlfriend was met with the sight of his pale, hyperventilating form, struggling to explain his terrifying encounter. His ankle bore the unmistakable mark of a giant hand, the skin red and inflamed, burning as if seared by a chemical burn. His girlfriend and her friends were left in shock as they all saw the mark clear as day, and none of them could accurately explain what it was or how it happened. One of her friends had suggested that maybe one of the underwater plants had got wrapped around his leg, and maybe in a panic he thought he saw that, but he swears by what happened. In fact, Doug would only then describe this thing as a monstrous humanoid aquatic entity. He recalled its face and said it had lizard-like eyes that were yellow, but could not see any teeth. Now, the existence of such a thing lurking in the depths of a lake was beyond anyone's comprehension, and it left such an impact on him and terrified him that he permanently gave up swimming at all, and he still apparently suffers with trauma from it. Another experienced diver by the name of Robert was no stranger to the unpredictable nature of the sea. For Robert had spent countless hours beneath the waves, exploring the underwater wilderness beneath the surface. Yet, nothing could prepare Robert for what he was about to witness. So the day started like any other, with Robert gearing up for a routine dive off the coast of Cornwall, England. He noticed that the water was unusually calm that day, despite the weather conditions. So he descends down into the depths, where everything looks fairly normal and nothing is out of place yet, but as he starts to descend more and more, he notices the temperature of the water change and the atmosphere shift, as he would describe. And he would say that it was almost as if the ocean held its breath. Now suddenly, he notices a strange pulsating glow appearing in the distance, and intrigued by this, he actually swims in the direction towards it to investigate. Now, as he drew closer, he describes the light intensifying, which would reveal an enormous disc-shaped object just hovering silently in the water. It wasn't like a UFO he would go on to describe, it was more like just a flat dinner plate, almost, but was this shiny metallic metal. Unlike anything he had ever seen, this thing was probably about 20 feet in diameter and was just sitting there stationary. It made no noise other than the humming he described, way to classify what it was at the time, but as he got closer to this thing, he described that he just got a really bad feeling like he needed to get away from it now. He would later learn that what he encountered was a USO, otherwise known as Unidentified Submerged Object. Another diver encountered the strange and mysterious off the coast of Australia. This diver, by the name of Jordan, was exploring the coral reefs off the coast of Australia. And now he was no stranger to the mysteries of the deep as well, and he too, just like Robert, had spent countless hours beneath the surface, but again, was not prepared for what was about to happen. Now, as Jordan descended into the blue, he noticed strange movements off in the distance that did not look like fish or typical marine life. At first, he simply dismissed it as a school of fish, but as he drew closer out of curiosity, the shapes were too large, too humanoid. He began instantly getting nervous, thinking that maybe it was other divers that needed help just by their movements, and that's when he noticed that there was something very off about these other divers. That these were actually entities in a shape of a humanoid, their bodies streamlined, seemingly adapted to life under the sea. And they moved with an almost hypnotic grace, their limbs and body undulating rhythmically as they would swim through the water. Now, Jordan could hardly believe his eyes, since he had heard tales of things like sea serpents and mermaids, but never actually seeing something so real and visceral. He described them as being completely black, and that they had a very elongated face, and that there were actually 3 of them swimming in his direction. Having no idea what he should even do, he did not have any sort of defense on him, he just felt an overwhelming sense of fear and decided to go back to the boat as fast as he could. He never went into detail how far away he was from his boat, or how deep he was in the water, or the coral reef that he was around, but apparently as he got close to his boat, these 3 humanoid beings stopped pursuing him altogether and disappeared into the coral. Which makes us ask, what were these things? What kind of entities were they? And is it possible they were alien at all or native to our own world? Another eyewitness had several other stories to share. A man by the name of Armand has 2 in particular. Now, in the 1970s, Armand's father used to do some hands-on engineering work for different government and military branches. He had worked on numerous secret projects and had done various things. His father had always told him many stories growing up about just some of the stuff he had done, but much of it he hadn't been able to share due to many NDAs that he had signed. But he did relay several fascinating accounts to Armand. Now, Armand's father, as he was getting older, he was beginning to share more and more things that he hadn't before. Now, he had always told Armand that he didn't think he had much time left, so he wanted his son to know what was going on, at least to an extent. Well, back in the mid-70s, Armand's father, who had worked on a special project that the government was working on going into the Great Lakes, apparently they had underground bases along one of the lakes. Armand believes that it was Lake Michigan, if he remembered correctly, and this is where his father would work on these submarines and even work in them as they were deployed into the lake itself. Now, his father told him that he was never told precisely what they were looking for, but for around 6 years, they were doing a deep exploration project and hunting for something near the bottom. Again, he needed to figure out what. It sounded like they were trying to find a possible vessel or something of the likes. Now, his father informed Armand that he worked with some other highly advanced engineers to build a state-of-the-art special sonar detection system at the time, one that was proprietary to the government and military in this section. Now, one of his duties was to be on board during each departure and monitor and ensure the sonar machinery was functioning as intended. Now, here's where things get interesting. The lake doesn't get super deep. If Armand recalled, it's around 250 to 280 meters is about where it caps off. Now, his father told him they were roughly 220 meters deep then, and something substantial had popped up on their sonar machinery. Now remember, this was back in the 70s, so it wasn't anything as advanced as today. His father also had built other machinery to distinguish based on different data whether something was an object, organic matter, or a living organism like a fish. This thing approached the submarine closer and closer, showing larger and far more prominent on the sonar. Armand's father became really nervous because everything pointed to it being an organism. Still, nothing that could be this large would live at the bottom of the lake. His supervisor thought it was potentially an enemy vessel. Still, his father told him the metrics and sonar told a different story. Whatever this thing was, it was so large that as it moved past the submarine, its sheer force in the water going through would knock the submarine off course and almost sent it spiraling to the bottom. The submarine did nearly a somersault in the water and practically nosedived. The crew and everybody aboard were scared and freaking out, but everything seemed to steady once they regained their position. Now, nobody really talked about what it could have been, and everybody just continued their mission. Armand went on to state that the submarine his father was on wasn't a typical military submarine. It was roughly half the size and probably only held 20 people at most. His father informed him that it scared the living daylights out of him and made him very hesitant about future expeditions. He said he wasn't sure if it was a large fish or what it was, but he knew it was huge. Judging by the metrics and sonar readings, he said it was at least 3 times the size of a blue whale. Now we're talking about something around 200 feet in length compared to a submarine. His father wasn't that shocked though, because something of that significant size could potentially live and survive at the bottom of such a massive body of water, especially if there are underground inlets to the ocean and other lakes like the military claims there are. He said he was also informed of specific underground channels that could be taken from lake to lake and out to the ocean. However, he never saw them himself, so Armand's father is just really going off what other intel he had. Now, the second, more fascinating project that Armand's father had shared with him was one about a strange corpse that had washed up on the shores of Maine in the early 1980s. Now, at this time, Armand's father had actually been stationed at another secret base on Maine. He and his crew had discovered this massive, slightly decomposed body of what they believed to be a Kronosaurus, which is a sizable prehistoric crocodile. Apparently, his father had extracted DNA samples from the tissue. The appearance alone suggested it might be a Kronosaurus. Still, its more reptilian features led him to believe that it could be some sort of prehistoric crocodile. He couldn't reveal all the details, even as he neared his life's end, but he shared that there had been extensive DNA splicing and testing to create something similar, and that these at some point in the early 1980s were then released into the wild as part of an experiment to see how they would survive and interact with the current modern-day ecosystem. Now, it was his father that also revealed that a marine DNA project had been conducted in the early 1980s. Given the freshness of the corpse they had found, he wouldn't have been surprised if it resulted from this program, possibly a splice of a dinosaur and reptilian DNA. Now, alternatively, it could not have been a natural ocean inhabitant and had simply washed ashore. The area where it was found was also remote, far from any prying eyes of the public. It was as large as a whale and possessed razor-sharp teeth. Armand's father would retire from these secret projects right around 1984, but then shortly passed away from cancer by 1998. Now, these stories stuck with Armand growing up his entire life, especially in the past 20 years after learning the truth about what his father was involved in, but again, it's all anecdotal and hearsay, so it really leaves us wondering, what if? And because you guys made it this far into the video, I want you to all comment down below, let's go scuba diving, to see who made it to the end of the video. If you guys enjoyed this video and want to see more eyewitness accounts and things of the strange and unexplainable, simply smack that like and subscribe button for more. As always, I love you all, keep an open mind, and I'll see you guys in the very next video.